And it is often said, but it is not backed up by the numbers, at least not for the Netherlands. If you look at what we have done in the last couple of years, this has been a government that has been spending tremendously on all sorts of parts of what the government can spend on, from defense to schools to roads and police, and of course also on climate change. And that is a topic that will stay with us for not only the next couple of years, but the next decades, frankly.
Whether you are in the Trump camp or in the Thunberg camp, or like a lot of us somewhere in between, there is clearly a transition going on the global climate. How much more money is the Netherlands going to be spending on that?
Well, we will be spending more money, and I think the task for politicians is to truly now tackle this problem, but do it in such a way that we do take our populations with us. There is this divide that you are actually referring to as well, that we do need to bridge. This is a time of transition. It is imperative that we do take action, but we do have to do it with our populations.
The government announced this Invest.nl fund last week, 1.7 billion euros. That's quite a chunk of change to put into this fund. Is that fund there in case of emergencies to bail out the financial system in the Netherlands if there is a crisis this year, or does it have another role?
It has a completely different role, and we have other instruments for that. InvestNL truly is there to make sure that where the private sector is unable to do some sort of things in terms of innovation or climate change investments, the government can actually help bring parties together and co-invest, basically.
You see, there are some cynics out there who wonder if this is being done because the Dutch pension system is starting to squeal because of these low interest rates in Europe. I think most Dutch prime ministers we've spoken to over the years, in fact, there hasn't been that many recently.
Mr.
over this
Rutte's been around for a while now,
He has been around for a while. But I mean, the message has been these rates are too low, negative rates in Europe don't help the Netherlands, something has to be done. We have an ECB meeting today. Would you like to hear something being done? What do you want to know from Christine Lagarde?
Well, frankly speaking, this very low interest climate has been there for a while, and you're absolutely right. It is hurting our pension system. It is difficult for the regular savers. For them, it is very difficult. For me, as a finance minister, there's also a very different side to that whole picture, because it has never been cheaper to actually get access to money. So I'm in the weird situation as the finance minister of a AAA country, where when I borrow billions of dollars, even when it is for a 10 or 20-year period, I actually get money in return for lending.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And as we've heard from the CEOs already this week of ING, Mr. Harmers and his equivalent over at ABN AMRO, and across the continent, these guys are terrified that their costs are more than they can make in revenue from this. You speak to these gentlemen all the time as well. There is potentially an existential danger for European banks because of negative rates. Let's not be too glib about this one as well. We had a big financial banking crisis in 2009, 2011, and it could come back again very quickly.
Yeah, and the difficulty here is that whenever the ECB wants to comment on the economies, that for them is perfectly fine. But I do think it is imperative that even though sometimes it might be difficult, finance ministers shouldn't talk about ECB policies. We've been there in the past, and that is something that we shouldn't return to.
Because the banking industry is crying out for the ministers they give you the revenues, that gives them the right to tell you to lobby, dare I say it, Madame Lagarde, doesn't it?
Yeah, but well, if I need to choose between a world where politicians are actually in charge of central banks and also the European central banks, or a world where they sometimes have to shut up even when it is difficult, I rather choose the latter.
Well, let me ask you another question. We've seen the chief executives of both ABN and ING this week, and they have a 1,000-yard stare that suggests weariness. And it's not just the low interest rates, but obviously it is that. But it's the sense also of extra regulation constantly coming down the pipe from the government and from Brussels, whether it's to do with data privacy, whether it's to do with other aspects of know your client. Have they got a point here that in a time where it's difficult for them to make a decent turn on NIMs, the last thing they need is excess regulation, particularly when in the United States, the administration there is trying to chip it away as quickly as possible to stimulate banking system growth?
Well, frankly speaking, and clearly these two banks are tremendously important for us as a country. At the same time, we do know that something quite substantial happened, which we call the financial crisis, with all sorts of repercussions for not only the financial sector, but society at large. And if you look at today, and you look, for example, at the tremendous effort that we have ahead of us in terms of anti-money laundering, I do think it is fair that the government does more, but we also ask for banks and financial institutions to do their fair share.
Can I just ask you one very quick one before we go? Sajid Javid was on my panel yesterday talking about this timetable for a Brexit agreement with Europe. Did you find him credible?
Well, this is up to the British, as the whole Brexit is up to the British. To me, it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy for Europe, and it has all sorts of geopolitical and financial and economical repercussions, particularly for my country. But it is a decision made by the British, and it is now our joint task to make sure we make this Brexit as soft as possible.